No fence, the Canadian guard says. The bears handle that. The German prisoners stare into the tree line and stop talking. No barbed wire, no towers, no machine guns. Just dark spruce, cold wind, and a wilderness stretching for miles around Whitewater Lake in Manitoba. Some later retellings swear the guard pointed at grizzlies. The records around Riding Mountain point to black bears, wolves, and something even meaner, the cold. Either way, the message lands hard. Escape does not start with a sprint. It starts with getting lost. And what happened next turns a prison camp into one of the strangest war stories in North America. By late 1943, Canada held more than 34,000 German prisoners of war. The biggest camps sat behind fences in places like Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. Whitewater was different. It sat about 200 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, deep inside Riding Mountain National Park, in a remote timber operation built to fight a wartime fuel shortage. The camp had 15 buildings and 440 German POWs. 400 men cut poplar for fuel wood. 40 worked as cooks, clerks, medics, and tradesmen. For each working day, they earned 50 cents. Strange enough, but the strangest thing was security. There was almost none that looked like security. No barbed wire ringed the camp. No searchlights swept the trees at night. Boundaries were marked with red flags and blazes. Around 45 civilian guards watched the site at first, backed by a small detachment from the Veterans Guard of Canada, many of them older First World War veterans with rifles and heavy coats. The real wall was geography. Then the camp stood roughly 10 kilometers from the nearest road. Beyond that lay muskeg, forest, sudden weather, and a park of roughly 3,000 square kilometers. Karl Landmann, one of the POWs sent there in October 1943, saw the irony right away. He expected steel, shouting, and punishment. Whitewater looked more like a logging town in the bush. Men worked outside. They breathed pine air. They watched elk move through the timber. At times, they spotted bears and wolves. One guard reportedly answered their disbelief with a dry Canadian joke. "Go ahead, the bush will bring you back." They laughed. Then they smelled the cold on the wind and stopped. Here's what they didn't know. Whitewater would test them far faster than any fence ever could. 5 days after the prisoners arrived, that lesson hit. It was October 31st, 1943. 19 Germans left camp on their day off for a hike. They were not carrying proper provisions. They wore uniforms, followed old logging roads and game trails, and treated the outing like a break from routine. A few wanted to explore. A few wanted to map the area in their heads. Maybe some wanted to see how hard escape might really be. Then the snow came. Not a light dusting. A prairie-edge storm rolled through the park and turned the trails white. Wind pushed flakes sideways. Tracks disappeared. The trees all started to look the same. Needles rattled. Wet cloth clung to skin. Breath smoked in front of faces. By dusk, 19 men who had walked out casually were cold, hungry, and lost. Back at camp, the roll call turned ugly. 19 missing. The commandant sent out alarms. RCMP officers joined the search. Police in Brandon and Winnipeg were notified. Newspapers quickly called it one of the biggest prison breaks in Canada. What happened next made the story even stranger. The missing prisoners did not know they were famous. They were too busy trying not to freeze. According to later accounts, the men finally stopped wandering and huddled down for the night. Snow packed onto boots. Gloves stiffened. Stomachs cramped. Every snapping branch sounded like an animal in the dark. If you think that's crazy, remember this. These men had been sent to a camp with no fence, then got trapped by the first real taste of Manitoba weather. At first light, they split into smaller groups and stumbled back in different directions. Some wandered straight into patrols. Some found camp on their own. By the end of the day, all 19 had returned or been brought back. Cold, embarrassed, very much alive. When questioned, each man insisted the same thing. "We got lost." This time, the guards believed them, but the RCMP was less sentimental. Investigators suspected the hike had doubled as reconnaissance for a future escape. That fear was not ridiculous. Escape carried prestige inside POW camps. Men talked about it. They dreamed in maps. Whitewater, though, kept teaching the same lesson. Distance on paper meant nothing out there. Winter deepened. The camp settled into routine. Axes bit frozen wood. Saw teeth screeched. Smoke hung over the buildings in the morning. Men hauled logs through air cold enough to sting the inside of the nose. Yet the place also grew unexpectedly human. POWs built dugout canoes from spruce and poplar. Each they kept stray cats and dogs. One black bear cub even became a camp mascot, a bizarre detail that sounds invented but is part of the record. It gets worse, though, if you were hoping captivity would stay simple. Freedom made discipline harder. Some prisoners slipped beyond camp limits at night. Homemade compasses appeared. A few sold woodcrafts and saved money. Some reportedly sneaked off to nearby dances in immigrant farming communities, then slipped back before morning. Imagine that contrast. One week, you are a soldier in Hitler's war. The next, you are a POW in the Canadian bush, trying to dance without getting caught. The guards knew the camp's weakness. The prisoners knew it too. So in June 1944, authorities replaced the civilian guard force with the Veterans Guard to tighten control and improve production. Even then, the camp never became a normal prison. The wilderness still did most of the work. And then came Hans Weiss. Weiss was not content with jokes about bears and snow. He wanted out. He had no interest in becoming comfortable. According to accounts from the camp, he was the most determined escapee Whitewater produced. He studied the edges. He watched patrol patterns. He understood that a camp without walls could tempt a man into believing he was already half free. That was the trap. One day, Weiss got beyond the park boundary. Then everything changed. He moved south, reached transportation, and bought a train ticket to Winnipeg. For a moment, the impossible seemed possible. A German POW from a camp buried in Manitoba wilderness was moving through the outside world. But that wasn't the worst part. The farther he got from Whitewater, the harder it became to stay invisible. Accent, clothing, papers, money, hunger. Every small detail could betray him. 4 days after his escape, police caught him in Winnipeg. And still, Weiss did not quit. Later, he escaped again, stole a truck, and pushed toward Dauphin. This time, authorities found him in the most human way possible. He was sitting in a bar, eating. The image almost sounds funny until you realize what it means. Even the boldest escape plan crashed into the same wall. Not wire, need, food, warmth, shelter, directions, human contact. Whitewater did not need towers because the land stripped every escape down to basics. They had no idea the camp's greatest guard was waiting for the first mistake. The real climax of Whitewater's story is not a gunfight or a dramatic chase. It is the moment the prisoners finally understood what held them there. Picture the scene. Late fall. Snow crusts over the ground. The lake lies dark and flat. Spruce trunks stand like black posts against the sky. A prisoner looks out from a camp with no walls and feels the wild pulling at him. Walk far enough, and there is freedom. That thought keeps returning. It whispers all winter. Then memory answers back. 19 men lost in one storm. Frozen fingers. No food. No trail. A night in the bush where every sound feels close. And somewhere out there, yes, bears. Maybe not the grizzlies of the title, but black bears, wolves, and a cold so brutal it behaved like a living thing. That is when the joke stops being a joke. The bears handle that. What the guard really meant was simple, and nature would do what fences could not. It would confuse you, slow you, expose you, drive you back hungry, or deliver you to the first road looking desperate enough for anyone to notice. Hans Weiss proved the point. He got farther than most. He touched the world outside. He rode a train. He stole a truck. He sat down in a bar like a free man. And still the camp reached out and pulled him back, not through iron bars, but through geography, weather, and the 1,000 practical needs of staying alive. Carl Landman and others saw the deeper irony. Whitewater felt less cruel than many camps. Men worked in the open. They saw the sky. Some even remembered those years with a complicated kind of gratitude. But that softer surface hid a harder truth. This camp did not have to shout. It did not have to threaten. It simply waited. Here's the quotable line the story leaves behind. The prison was invisible, and that made it stronger. Once that truth settled in, Whitewater changed in the minds of the prisoners. It still looked open. It still smelled of cut wood, coal smoke, damp wool, and lake water. Men still worked, joked, traded stories, and counted the seasons. But the illusion had broken. Escape remained possible in theory. In practice, most runs ended in return, capture, or surrender to common sense. That created a strange atmosphere. Some prisoners stopped romanticizing escape and focused on surviving the war. They read. They carved wood. They worked. They watched for mail. They made peace, at least for a while, with an upside-down world where enemy guards sometimes treated them better than their own commanders had. Others still tested the edges. "That next time I make it," a prisoner would mutter. A guard might answer, "Next time, pack a blanket." Dark humor kept both sides sane. And that may be the oddest part of all. Whitewater was built during total war, yet daily life often revolved around work quotas, weather, food, and routine. Each woodcutter was expected to produce about 3/4 of a cord a day. History at ground level rarely looks like grand speeches. It looks like frozen boots by a stove. By September 1945, the war was over, and Whitewater began to close. The camp was dismantled. Buildings vanished. The men were moved on. What remained was memory, and memory kept the sharpest details. The missing 19, Hans Weiss in a Winnipeg arrest, a stolen truck, a bear cub in camp, canoes on Whitewater Lake, and above all, only that first stunned glance at a prison without a fence. Then everything changed once more. Many former German POWs later spoke about Canada with unexpected warmth. Some even immigrated back after the war. That does not erase the fact that they were prisoners. It does reveal how complicated this history is. Whitewater was confinement, but it was also exposure to a different world. The lesson of Whitewater is not that war became gentle in the Canadian bush. It is that captivity can wear a friendly face and still hold tight. The men at Riding Mountain learned that control did not always come from rifles. Sometimes it came from distance, weather, hunger, and one wrong turn under trees you could not name. That is why the story sticks. On paper, Whitewater sounds almost absurd. A POW camp without barbed wire. All you prisoners paid for labor, canoes on the lake, a bear cub in camp, men sneaking off to dances. But that absurdity is the point. Canada had built a prison that relied on the oldest jailer on Earth, the land itself. For American audiences, that matters because it flips the movie version of a POW camp upside down. No tower spotlight, no dramatic siren. Just a remote corner of North America where the forest, the weather, and one bad decision could shut down freedom faster than any locked gate. What they discovered was brutal and simple. Sometimes the strongest cage is the one you cannot see. Whitewater's irony still hits hard. In a war built on barbed wire and concrete, one of the strangest prison camps in North America survived on snow, distance, and fear of the bush. That is the lesson. Not every prison needs walls. If this story surprised you, drop a comment with the line that stuck with you most. And if you want the next episode, wait until you hear about the POWs who slipped into nearby towns and tried to pass for locals. Subscribe, stick around, and I'll bring you that story next. Because sometimes history's wildest guard wears fur, frost, and silence